Dear friends, welcome to the Eastern Front channel. On the eve of the battle for Berlin, the Smersh military counterintelligence agencies were tasked with finding and arresting Hitler and other leaders of Nazi Germany. As part of the advancing units of the First Belarusian Front, military counterintelligence stormed the Reichstag and the Reich Chancellery with a Führerbunker equipped in its courtyard, a carefully fortified, concreted underground structure in which Adolf Hitler and his propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels hid in the last months of the war. After the capture of the Führerbunker on May 2, 1945, and the detention by the Smersh authorities of the SS men who were in the bunker and tried to escape from Berlin, a painstaking collection of information about the possible locations of all the top leaders of the Third Reich began. Among the witnesses of the last days of the Nazi Führer were the Chief of Defense of the Citadel Sector, Reich Chancellery and Bunker, Wilhelm Monk, head of Hitler's personal guard Hans Rattenhuber, Senior Valet Heinz Linge, personal adjutant Otto Gunsche, as well as personal pilot, commander of the Führer Squadron Hans Bauer, in some sources, translators mistakenly listed as Hans Bauer. Their repeated interrogations about the circumstances of Hitler's death have been preserved in the materials of the Central Archive of the FSB of Russia, the State Archive of the Russian Federation, as well as in individual investigative cases in which they were held as war criminals. From the testimony of eyewitnesses, it followed that Adolf Hitler and Eva Braun, who married him the day before, committed suicide on April 30, 1945, and on May 1 they were followed by Joseph and Magda Goebbels, who had previously killed 6 of their children, whose corpses Soviet soldiers found in a bunker. On May 13, 1945, employees of the Smersh Counterintelligence Department of the 79th Rifle Corps discovered the burial place of the burnt corpses of Hitler and Eva Braun in the garden of the Reich Chancellery, the authenticity of which was confirmed by numerous forensic medical examinations. Documents from the investigative case of Hans Bauer, stored in the Department of the FSB of Russia for the Novgorod region, are published for the first time. Below are published documents from the Archive Fund of the Office of the FSB of Russia in the Novgorod region from the investigative file of the personal pilot of the Führer, SS Gruppenführer and Police Lieutenant General Hans Bauer. Even before Hitler came to power, Bauer, on the recommendation of Himmler and Hess, became his personal pilot. In 1934, he headed a government squadron. It was Bauer who brought German Foreign Minister Joachim von Ribbentrop to Moscow in 1939 to negotiate a non-aggression pact. Until the last days of the life of the head of the Third Reich, the personal pilot enjoyed his full confidence. It was assumed that Bauer could be assigned a mission to evacuate Hitler and other Nazi leaders from Berlin. For this reason, he was in the Führerbunker and witnessed the last days and hours of Nazi Germany. Bauer told Soviet investigators about what he saw during interrogations. According to him, as soon as it became known that the Red Army units were approaching Potsdamer Platz, the women in the Führerbunker began to prepare for death. Magda Goebbels told the pilot that she carried a syringe and pills with poison that killed instantly, and Eva Braun gave orders regarding her property. Hans Bauer, along with Bormann's group, tried to break through the encirclement ring on tanks, but was seriously wounded and was captured by the Soviets. Here is the most valuable information about the death of Hitler. The Führer's last conversation with the pilot was on April 30, 1945. And now I propose to get acquainted with the handwritten testimony of SS Gruppenführer and Police Lieutenant General Hans Bauer. Bauer's autobiography. I, the son of the Postal Secretary Hans Bauer, was born on 19 June 1897 in the city of Ampfing. From the 6th to the 18th year of my life, I studied at a folk real school and a trade school. In 1915, I voluntarily joined the Army Aviation. I was in aviation until 1923, and then I joined the civil service. In 1932, I was seconded to accompany Adolf Hitler during his propaganda flights in connection with the upcoming elections. When the Führer came to power, he asked me to become his personal pilot and form a government squadron. In 1934, I became a major, and by the beginning of the war, I had 30 large passenger aircraft under my command. On January 30, 1945, I was promoted to lieutenant general. In the First World War, I received the following awards: the Iron Cross of the I and II class, the Bavarian Medal of Bravery, the Cross of Military Merit, the Cross in Memory of the War. In World War II, the following awards: Military Medal for Austria, for Czechoslovakia, for Memel. Receiving other awards both to me and to my subordinates in the squadron was delayed on the instructions of the Führer, so as not to act as in the First World War, when people close to the leadership receive awards first. Only 6 weeks before the end of the war, I was able to obtain permission to receive awards for my subordinates in the squadron. The Führer had to make an assessment of my military achievements during the war after its end. From various government officials, I received the following awards for flights performed in these countries: the Finnish Order of the White Rose, the Finnish Cross of the First Class to the White Rose, the Hungarian Cervical Order, the Military Cross of the First Class, the Romanian Cervical Order as a distinction, Crown of Romania, 2 Bulgarian Cervical Orders and 1 Order of Military Merit with a star, the Yugoslav Cervical Order with a star, the Order of Military Merit of the King, forgot his last name, the Order of the Crown of Italy. Hans Baur on October 1, 1945. Page 1. Secret. Handwritten testimony. Prisoner of war of the former SS and Police Obergruppenführer, Lieutenant General, Hitler's personal pilot and commander of the air squadron of the Supreme Headquarters of Germany, Baur Hans. Since 1932, I, Baur Hans, an Obergruppenführer of the SS troops, have been Hitler's personal pilot, and since that time I have made all flights with him. In 1934, Hitler instructed not to create a government air squadron, of which I was the commander until the German surrender in May 1945. As a pilot of the Lufthansa Aviation Society and often flying on the Munich-Berlin line, as a member of the NSDAP since 1926. I met a number of NSDAP leaders, including Heinrich Himmler, Hermann Esser, Robert Ley, and other prominent Nazis. In 1932, they recommended me to Hitler to conduct election flights. Since then, Hitler has flown exclusively with me. Performing the duties of Hitler's pilot, I formally until 1934, and still remained in the service of the Lufthansa community. In 1934, he was enlisted in the SD Security Service group under Hitler, which was headed by SS Lieutenant General Hans Rattenhuber. Recently, I had the rank of SS and Police Obergruppenführer, which corresponds to the rank of Lieutenant General, and reported directly to Hitler. While trying to break out of the encircled Berlin, I was wounded and captured on May 2, 1945 in the district of the Stettin railway station in Berlin. Only once in 1940 Hitler did not fly with me, having flown from Munich to Berlin, since at that time I myself was flying to Moscow with Minister Ribbentrop, and Hitler was in a hurry to meet Ribbentrop returning from Moscow in order to hear his report on the results of the negotiations. In my work, I often had to be with Hitler not only during flights, but also during lunches, dinners, and vacations. These lunches and dinners were usually attended by the narrowest circle of persons, consisting of Hitler's aides de camp of some leading persons, including Imperial Minister Goebbels, Reichsmarschall Göring, Reich Chancellor Böhme, and others. Sometimes individual ministers and Gauleiters, rarely generals and other military men, were invited to dinner. At the end of 1943, Hitler stopped eating at the common table because there was a suspicion that there was a traitor among the inner circle, and individual statements at the table became public. It was established that the enemy intelligence became aware of the facts known to the narrowest circle of people. By the end of 1944, a mood of mutual distrust prevailed in the headquarters. Page 2. Being at Hitler's headquarters all the time, I was aware of the main events that took place immediately before the final collapse and complete surrender of Germany. In early January 1945, Hitler moved to Berlin from Rastenburg, East Prussia, after the start of the offensive on the Western Front. He remained in Berlin constantly, leaving only once in mid-March 1945. In the direction of the city of Fürstenwald for inspection of military units, he returned to Berlin the same day a few hours later. At the time of Hitler's return to Berlin, I myself was in the city of Munich with my family and was summoned to Berlin on January 8 to 10, 1945. While in Berlin, Hitler became even more distant from us and became more and more withdrawn, staying away from everyone and spending all the time in his shelter. During the day, he usually went out for 1 to 2 hours in the garden to walk the dog. The schedule of his work in Berlin was as follows. In the morning at 9 o'clock, newspapers were brought to him and the working day began. The discussion of martial law took place in the afternoon at 16 o'clock and at 1 o'clock in the morning. At night at 3 o'clock we drank tea, after which he still worked from 4 to 6 in the morning and then slept until 9 o'clock. I was called to Hitler only when I was given a flight assignment or if they wanted to get a certificate from me about the duration of the flight to a particular place. Field Marshal Milch usually reported to Hitler on aviation issues. Orders for the air fleet were transmitted through DOERING or his chief of staff, or through Hitler's aviation adjutant, Colonel von Blov. If Hitler had any doubts about the technical issues of aviation, then he asked me about them. I myself did not report on aviation news, because one day I received a big scolding from GOERING for reporting to Hitler some aviation innovations before him. Sometimes I was present at the last night tea, but then little was said about the war, since Hitler liked to talk about other topics during his rest hours. During his stay in Berlin, Hitler always maintained the appearance of optimism and confidence in the victory of Germany. Most of all, he liked it when Minister Speer or General Architect J.E.S.E.L.D.R. showed him models of new buildings for Berlin, Munich, or Hamburg. He spent hours looking at them, gave all kinds of instructions, expressed his comments and wishes. Back in January and February 1945, such discussions were often held so that others, including myself, despite the deteriorating situation, thought that things were not so bad, and since Hitler was dealing with future construction, it meant that we could not lose the war. Dear friends, that's all for today. It was Tim, and goodbye. If you are interested in other parts of this document, please leave any comments below and let me know.